So what do you as a contract professional need to know about including quality assurance surveillance plan terms in your contracts? So let's talk about ensuring supplier quality in performance-based contracts. By the way, this is the ABCs of performance-based contracts manager training series. There is a clear connection between getting supplier quality right in the statement of work and then managing to those quality requirements after contract execution. We, as contract professionals, are the connective glue between statements of work and contract management. So what better way to discuss this connection than to talk about Boeing? Boeing's quality failure is in the news, and today I'll provide training to you to pass on to your team. Everything I talk about today is equally applicable to manufacturing and enterprise software types of contracts. In my case study analysis, I talk more about this Boeing quality failure based on publicly available National Transportation Safety Board preliminary report. And so you can get some information by following the link here. Okay, so let's get started. For those of you who are new to the training series, performance-based contracts are a class of agreements where payment for goods and services is contingent upon the supplier achieving clearly outlined performance goals or desired outcomes. Now, Boeing's contract with Spirit Aerospace was definitely a performance-based agreement, and so was Spirit Aerospace's contract with their subsidiary Malaysia Spirit Aerospace. Now, typically, performance-based contracts contain the following 5 critical components. 1, a performance work statement or a performance-based statement of work. 2, a quality assurance surveillance plan. 3, performance-based metrics. 4, contractual incentives or disincentives. And 5, the right pricing model. I can promise you that Boeing flowed quality assurance to Spirit, and Spirit flowed it down to the Malaysian counterpart. So where was the breakdown? Somewhere in Boeing's quality assurance surveillance plan over both Spirit's work and over its own work. Boeing performed work, or what some of my clients called self-performed work. So what do you as a contract professional need to know about including quality assurance surveillance plan terms in your contracts? That's what we're going to talk about today. The Quality Assurance Surveillance Plan, QASP, or Software Quality Assurance Plan, SQAP, directs the supplier to perform according to performance objectives and standards that are laid out in the statement of work or specification. So the QASP or the SQAP provides specific details on how the Boeing company or the buying company will ensure that the thing or service meets quality standards through survey, observation, testing, sampling, or evaluation so that you can document contractor performance and that those results of surveys, witness points, inspections determines compliance with the specification and with the statement of work. So what do we know from that preliminary Transportation Board report? That the entire sequence of events were triggered by misaligned drilled holes. So Spirit Aerosystems passed through a fuselage that had misaligned drilled holes, and that through the Boeing Quality Assurance Surveillance Plan, their witness points, they determined that those holes were misaligned, misdrilled. So then they had to be re-drilled. And then that's when the whole cascading series of events where Boeing's self-perform work to reinstall the door plug was not properly installed, and then their own quality assurance surveillance plans, their witness points over self-perform work apparently didn't happen. So that's how we know that it's a quality assurance surveillance breakdown. We know that there was a quality problem. And according to testimony in front of the United States Senate, the National Transportation Safety Board believes that Spirit Aerosystems was using individuals that were contractors through, again, subcontractors. So we have lots of flow down. So it actually becomes like the game of telephone, right? Where Boeing telephones Spirit, hey, drill the holes in the right place. And Spirit's like, yep, sure. So we call Malaysia, hey, drill the holes in the right place. And then it comes back to the United States and we're like, hey, so now we're going to talk to contractor 1, 2, 3, and 4, and all of you got to drill the holes in the right space. So that's what an extended supply chain looks like, the game of telephone. The difference in the game of telephone is instead of it being a kindergarten teacher that laughs at the end when they hear what the silly thing is that's gone through the whole class and back to the teacher in the game of telephone, is that Boeing has the responsibility as the adult in the room to assure quality through surveillance. And that should all be planned out and documented so that they inspect Spirit's quality, but then they also have to inspect their own quality. Okay, so when in this manager training series, let's talk about how these things really look in real life with contract terms, specification terms. And everything I talk about is as equally applicable to manufacturing as it is to artificial intelligence or enterprise type software agreements, where we're still going to be looking for some sort of quality assurance surveillance plan. And in AI, it's the human being still. Okay, so there's 3 topics for our agenda today. Statements of work and specifications, 1. 2, terms and conditions, and 3, let's talk about what the contract professional's role is. Okay, 1, statements of work and specifications. What is a work requirement? So work requirements are details about the goods or services the supplier will deliver. They are typically written before bidders submit a proposal. The work requirements can be written as a statement of work or as a technical specification, and the supplier must meet all of the work requirements to fully deliver the goods and services. And this is way more than a description that you would find in a purchase order. So the examples today are both from manufacturing and from enterprise software contracts. These are real contracts that I have found that I can provide these sentences from. Okay, so telltale signs in a statement of work that you're looking at performance-based contracts and that you need to align the pre-award specification to the post-award contract management in your role as the contract professional and in the terms and conditions. So first, let's look at the telltale signs in the statement of work. Quality. Quote, contractor shall provide the digital hardware and software system in full compliance with section 5.15 of the owner supplied QA requirements. So that's that. If I read that in the statement of work or specification, that would trigger me to think I now have a performance-based agreement. Safety, quote, work that has the potential to pose operational risks, including scopes that are first of a kind or first in a while, shall require the contractor to provide additional assurances with regards to technical and or project management proficiency of personnel. So what they're saying is, listen, if this is about first of a kind or first in a while, and it has anything to do with operational safety, then you have to make sure your personnel knows how to work in those environments, first of a kind or first in a while. Security. Quote, a cybersecurity plan shall be supplied by the contractor which meets or exceeds owner's documented requirements in section 9.1.3.a. Testing, quote, the control system design will be proof tested during factory acceptance testing. Now, who's going to do factory acceptance testing? Well, that's when it comes into our terms and conditions, because we will tell them who's going to do factory acceptance testing. So this is where it gets very exciting for me. Oversight, which is inspections or witnessing. So they might be called those. Quote, contractor shall design, develop, procure, manufacture, test, deliver, as well as provide oversight of installation and site acceptance testing, also known as commissioning, as described in the specification. So when you see these telltale signs, you're going to now include terms in your contract that ensures these specifications are enforced. Okay, so 2, contract terms and conditions. Now, the appropriate terms and conditions will likely be drafted by the legal department with consultation from other stakeholders in your company. So it's not your responsibility to draft the terms, but to flag to the legal department that these terms are needed in the template agreement if you don't see the right terms. So here are some examples from real contracts. Telltale signs in a contract. So what are you going to look for? Quality. This is what the contract terms should be, not in the specification, but in the actual contract itself. Quote, the supplier shall submit a software quality assurance plan, SQAP, for owner review and approval to describe the quality aspects of the software development process. Preparation of the SQAP should follow the guidance in, and then you would put what that would be in the specification, in an attachment, in an exhibit, etc. So that's the kind of clause that actually goes into the contract. What about for safety? Quote, contractor shall initiate and maintain reasonable safety precautions and programs to conform with applicable laws, applicable permits, applicable standards, prudent industry practices, and other requirements designed to prevent injury to persons. So when you see that there's a safety requirement in the statement of work that we just read a minute or two ago about having first in a kind, first in a while, and what that means for operational safety, then you would draw in and make sure that you've got all applicable laws, applicable permits. Now, this particular one is to prevent injury to persons, but you could very easily rewrite it so that it's requirements designed to prevent damage to operating systems or something to that extent. And that's where the law team would come in and help, ideally, if you were able to properly flag in the technical specification or statement of work the need for those terms, and you identified that the template you're asked to work with doesn't include those terms. Well, what about for security? Quote, contractor shall implement controls to provide for the protection of electronic data obtained from owner. Protection shall include controls to prevent the unauthorized disclosure, unauthorized modification, and assurance that availability is maintained for electronic data. Contractor shall report security incidences to owner that result in the non-authorized disclosure of, alteration of integrity, or non-availability of electronic data. So that's what the term in the contract would look like. Testing. Quote, the supplier shall submit a software test plan, software test specification, and software test procedures for owner review and approval prior to the execution of testing. So what that contract tells me is so we use the example for the statement of work for factory acceptance testing. So what that tells me is either the owner can do factory acceptance testing by flying into the manufacturing facility and doing the tests themselves while the manufacturer watches, or in this case, the supplier for the software is going to do all of it. So they have to submit the plan, the specifications, the procedures, and then the owner reviews it all to make sure that it's robust enough to catch any errors before that software system is deployed. And so then you've got, is the owner doing it or is the owner overseeing it being done? And that's where your contract is incredibly important. So the contract between Boeing and Spirit should have had their own quality assurance people to note that the rivets were drilled in the wrong place. And then Boeing caught it in their QASP, their quality assurance surveillance planning. However, they didn't apparently catch their own errors for their own self-performed work. That's what we're gathering based on publicly available data from the National Transportation Safety Board. Okay, oversight. So inspections and witness points. Quote, contractor shall provide owner with its installation, operation, and maintenance, IAOM, manual in accordance with Article 3.1.5. Owner's review of any draft of that manual shall not be construed as approval of the manual. So now this one's really interesting because this is really about true oversight, meaning you guys, you the supplier, you're going to write this manual and we're going to review it, but your manual still plays such a critical part of the quality of the product that we're going to do a witness point. So not a hold point, but a witness point where we're going to then review, and there might even be an acceptance of the manual depending on how the contract is written. But that's where you would have the contract align with the specification. Okay, so that's how those connective tissues work together, and then why we're the connective the glue, so to speak, that connects these two things, the statement of work and the terms and conditions together. So then what is exactly your role as the contract professional? So third on our agenda, contract professional's role. Number one, you have to understand the work. Now, you're not a subject matter expert. I get that. So I'm not asking you to understand it like a subject matter expert, but you have to have some understanding. And like, I just went through this where I just was spinning in circles trying to understand the work on a fairly complex software implementation. And because we'd already selected the supplier, I just finally called the supplier. It was this most amazing woman. And she's like, I've got all the time for you, because she's the account representative and, does the biz dev and stuff. And I was like, oh, thank gosh. And so I just submitted a bunch of questions to her. She went and found the people in her company to answer them. She came back to me. Then I went back to the company, validated. I'm like, is this what you're saying? They're like, yeah, that's what we're saying. And I'm like, okay. So then I could mentor the person I was supposed to mentor to say, these are the terms and conditions we're looking for. So this is not easy, but it's still your role. And it's the number one thing you need to do. Okay. So what's the number two thing you need to do? You need to validate that the scope of work or specification is complete. And so how do you do that? You do that by asking everyone who's touched this. So at some organizations, they're really good about having a Rev 0, Rev 1, Rev 2, etc. And so you can ask, who are all of the subject matter experts that reviewed these revisions to get to the revision that you're now saying I can work with if I'm on the buying company side? Make sure that it's complete. If you're on the supplier side, when you go to validate that the specification is complete in a performance-based agreement, your job is then to create a list of assumptions pointing out ways in which that specification or that statement of work is incomplete. So I do some requests for solutions where I know that my specification and my scope of work is not complete. So I'm always asking then for those assumptions if I'm on the buy side, or if I'm on the supplier side, then I'm always asking for permission to submit those. And through the assumption process, we can negotiate that complete specification. Number three, your job then would be to look for the telltale signs of quality assurance in that specification or that statement of work. And so I know that one contract that went out as part of a request for proposal had conflicting terms in the statement of work and in the contract. So the template contract said certain things were going to be due at certain points having to do with safety and cybersecurity, and it was in direct conflict with the specification. And it's because both teams were working in silo. So the specification team worked, and then in this case, it was the buyer's team. So it was the contract professionals within supply chain, and this team that was writing the specification statement of work missed all their deadlines and never got the specification to the supply chain professional on time. So the whole thing kind of went out. So those things happen, and hopefully we can true that up in negotiations. Okay, so then 4, you have to ensure as a contract professional that the T's and C's obligate the supplier to perform according to applicable laws, regulations, and to your corporate policies. Now, when you're the supplier, you're looking at it and you're making sure that the laws are applicable, the regulations are applicable, and that the corporate policies are things that you can actually perform to. Just because it says all applicable laws and regulations, that term could have been written 20 years ago, and it just keeps getting copied and pasted into every template agreement. So what are the applicable laws and regulations? So if you're on the supply side, that's your job as the contract professional. And then 5, you have to ensure that the T's and C's are flowed down to all subcontractors. Now I'm going to go out on a limb and say that even though there were flow down provisions, Boeing said Spirit, you have to do a certain thing. Spirit said Malaysia, Spirit, you have to do a certain thing, that the actual work of quality surveillance was actually not done. So even though I think, and I'd be willing to bet a good dollar on that the terms were flowed down appropriately, the breakdown was in human error, meaning the human beings that actually have to perform that function. But there's no promises, because by the time you go from Boeing to Jeanette Nyden, who's working as an independent contractor, either as an individual or through some subcontractor that provides supplemental labor, what's been flowed down could be super questionable. Do you see what the disconnect is, and where we can get to a place in the world where a Boeing door plug falls out, right? Is that it still takes humans to actually do the surveillance, even if we write the most beautiful contracts in the whole world. Okay, so what's the bottom line for this training? Here's the bottom line. Contract professionals play a critical role in reviewing the technical specification and statement of work for all performance-based contracts. So by looking at the specification and the statement of work from the perspective of managing the contract to completion, even if you are not the human being who's going to be doing it, even if you've got a vendor management or supplier management team that's doing it, you are still looking at it from their perspective, contractor vendor management, or customer, if you're on the supply side. You as a contract professional can ensure that both the buying company and the contractor or supplier are clear on what is the performance expectation and how it will be appropriately monitored by the buying company. Okay, so here's my question to you. Do your performance-based contracts adequately obligate the supplier to perform following all kinds of applicable laws, regulations, and corporate policies? Or is it possible that you just have that boilerplate language and it really does not have a lot of meaning? All right, talk to you next time.